Hi everyone and welcome. Thank you for participating in the Japanese rice flour online workshop with Zachary Goper today. My name is Erin and I'll be your host this afternoon. I hope you enjoy our workshop. So this will be a 1-hour workshop. It'll start off with an introduction of webinar interactive features. And secondly, Chef Zachary will share us his experience about the distinctive characteristics of the Japanese rice flour. Thirdly, we will watch a short cooking demonstration video of how to use Japanese rice flour, followed with a Q&A session. And at the end of the event, we would like to ask you to help us fill out a short survey on this workshop. And the application to set a meeting directly with our rice flour manufacturer will be available afterward. So if you are interested in our Japanese rice flour or want to know more about Japanese rice flour and the manufacturer, you can fill out the application from product information and online meeting. So before getting into our main part, let me introduce our engagement features. If there are any questions that pop up in your mind, feel free to drop them through the Q&A button located on the bottom of the screen. And at the end of the event, we will pick 5 most popular questions to answer during the session. And secondly, if you are having trouble seeing the presentation slide, drag the white bar to the left or the right so you can adjust the screen ratio between the presentation slide and the presenters. Well, this only goes to those who are logged in with PC. So if you're using cell phone, it might not work, but for those people who are using PC, it's somewhere over here. So you can adjust the cursor and drag, see what's best for you. So next, well, let's welcome our Japanese rice flour ambassador, Chef Zachary Goper. So Zachary, please say hi to our workshop attendees.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to my house. I'm sorry we can't do this in person, but I'm excited to have you joining in, and I appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your day to focus on Japanese rice flour with us.
Perfect. So thank you very much, Chef Zachary. Next, we have a short welcoming video from our organizer, JFoodO. They are a Japanese government organization that promotes Japanese food products overseas. So let me play the little message video. Here we go.
Hi everyone, my name is Fumiko Uno of JFoodO. Thank you very much for joining us today. First of all, I would like to express my sincere sympathy for those of you facing difficult situation due to the coronavirus. Once again, thank you for taking your precious time in spite of the situation. Today, we would like to suggest the Japanese rice flour as an excellent ingredient for gluten-free baking. As you may know, Japan is a rice-eating country. There are about 800 origin varieties of rice in Japan. People have been making rice flour for more than 1,300 years. Rice itself and advanced milling techniques are the keys to the high quality. By the end of this workshop, you will surely want to try the Japanese rice flour on your own. I hope that these rice flour will be chosen as one of the solutions for your gluten-free baking. Last but not least, thanks to Chef Zachary for supporting this program. Chef have been dealing with the Japanese rice flour for a couple of years. I myself is looking forward to hearing his experience using the Japanese rice flour. Thank you for your attention and please enjoy the program.
Thank you very much, Miss Uno. So we will now move on to the main session. So Chef Zachary, you have been working as an ambassador chef for Japanese rice flour for 3 years now. How do you like to use the Japanese rice flour?
Yes, I love working with this stuff. I would like to give just a quick introduction to my career so people who don't know me will have a little bit of an understanding. I've had the opportunity to work with everything from a corporate hotel all the way to mom and pop bakeries and everything you can imagine in between. Have worked with world champion bakers and pastry chefs, MOF, and have opened my own bakery in 2011 and have since been making big strides towards trying to feed people the highest quality ingredients and the best craftsmanship possible for the types of foods that we make. Now, with the Japanese rice flour, the reason that I have had the opportunity to work with that is because I started making some gluten-free products for some family members that were intolerant to wheat, and also for members of my staff, believe it or not, at a bakery that were not able to eat wheat or any gluten products. So I began to experiment with these flours, these different types of flours and different styles, different methods that other bakeries are using in Europe and in South America and across the United States and Canada, where people are trying to experiment with other flours and see what kinds of products they can make. Well, as I started to do these experiments myself and communicate with other bakeries, with other bakers and people running gluten-free bakeries, I coincidentally came across the Japanese rice flour, and it really changed things for me overnight. So I've been extremely excited to be working with this stuff because it has really absolutely shifted my perception on gluten-free, where once it was a very difficult task to try to make a bread that felt like bread, or a cake that felt like cake and tasted like cake, using all gluten-free flours. But once I started using the Japanese rice flour, it changed the game for me completely, and I've now been able to adapt myself to how to use this flour. It's very easy. It comes, each time that you use it, you're going to have a great degree of consistency. It's always going to arrive lump-free, and it's always going to arrive with a level of freshness that you're going to be able to count on time and time again. If you've been sitting on that bag of flour for 3 months or for a year or for 3 weeks, whatever, it's always going to act the same. So for me, using Japanese rice flour was a big change in my ability to experiment in the realm of gluten-free.
Thank you for sharing. So now, based on your experience of using Japanese rice flour, would you like to introduce the future of Japanese rice flour?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The primary feature that people want to focus on here is that it is gluten-free. Now, I mean, we all know that about rice, but what makes Japanese rice flour different from other rice flours that you're going to find is the level of quality. So when you're trying to make breads from a myriad of different flours that are gluten-free, from flours that are high in lysine, like legume flours, and other flours that are very high in fat, like almond flour, coconut flour, or flours that are just pure starch, like tapioca flour or something like that. You're going to be running into a series of different challenges, but with the Japanese rice flour, you're going to find the consistency is there, the ability to adapt recipes to gluten-free by using the Japanese rice flour. It's going to kind of change the way you think about gluten-free baking, in that it's going to open up the potential to be able to make foods that otherwise seemed impossible to reach. But the proteins in the Japanese rice flour, the proteins in rice, are once hydrated, they have similar qualities to that of gluten in that there's a little bit of elasticity. Now that means that it'll retain gas. So when you talk about baking a myriad of different products that you want to have a texture similar to bread that's made with wheat or made with rye flour, you're going to be able to do that using rice flour. But specifically, the reason that Japanese rice flour is going to work so well for you is its level of consistency and the high level of quality going into the farming methods behind them.
Thank you. So the first characteristics of Japanese rice flour was gluten-free. So the second characteristics of Japanese rice flour is, I believe it's lump-free. Is that correct?
Yes, it's lump-free. And what that means to us as bakers is that when I've got three different styles of the Japanese rice flour here with me. And what that means is that when it arrives at your door, you're not going to have, you can pour the bag out and it's all going to come out in this very fine powder of identical particle size. And even though each brand is different, the particle size that are in each of these bags of flour is going to be identical. And the reason for this will be the third one. They all feel differently. Some of them will feel a little bit like talcum powder, very, very fine, and other ones will feel a little more coarse, but every particle will be like talcum or will be coarse. The particle size is identical. And the way that happens is that, we understand Japanese food to be of very high quality. When we think of different countries that focus on their cuisines as really something that is special and something that is cherished, we all think of Japanese cuisine as something that is a special type of food. And so we know that the culture of Japan cares very much about the quality of its food. And so every step along the way, that care is taken. Now, rice has been grown for centuries upon centuries in Japan, and you're going to find throughout Japan, different regions are growing the rice that's appropriate to that region. And the mills that are located there are going to be using the rice that is of that region. So each mill is going to be milling a different variety of flour, but what makes it lump-free, what makes it really, despite the different variety, what makes it so consistent is the invention of this type of mill that's being used in Japan right now, which is it's a cooled jet of air that's forced through very small holes. This jet of air pushes in through a cylinder, and as the grains fall through, the grains are forced to bounce into one another with this cool air, and they cannot come out the other side until they're an identical particle size. So there's no friction aside from the grains themselves that are touching each other. So it's not going to be like a roller mill or a stone mill or a hammer mill or any of that. You're going to see only this coming through the jet mill. And this method, if you've got the humidity level of the rice just perfect, as that goes through the mill and comes out as powder on the other side, the flour itself is going to be, as I said, of identical particle size, and it's of the right humidity. So when it goes into the bag, it will not coagulate again. It will come to you lump free. Now, that is very nice on a practical level from a baker's standpoint, because say you're the chef or the owner or whatever, and you are the one that creates the recipes. Well, you create your recipe. You know this is going to be consistent week after week, month after month, year over year. It's going to be consistent because that is what Japanese rice flour does. And so that means once you have created a recipe, you can pass it off to your sous chef and you can trust that it's going to come out right. When we talk about wheat baking, we very often run into the situation every September, November, right around there, where the new harvest comes in and it's, all bets are off and you gotta mess with your recipes again to get it right. But with the Japanese rice flour, it's not going to be that way. It's going to come to you lump free. It's going to come to you as this perfect little powder package that you can make a very consistent recipe with.
Thank you. It sounds like Japanese rice flour is very easy to handle. So how about the third characteristics, crumble-free?
Well, this is probably the factor that makes Japanese rice flour maybe the most attractive to us bakers, because when we look at crumble-free, we're examining how the structure of the dough performs. You see, I can bend this and it doesn't fall apart. This is kind of the nature of working with Japanese rice flour. This loaf is several days old, and yet it's still pliable. It was able to retain gas. It's able to absorb fat, to absorb water in a way that other flours just can't do, especially flours that are going to be higher in lysine. You're not going to see that that capability in them. And when it comes to the consistency that you want in flour, that is going to give you that assured feeling that once you've made a recipe, you know it's going to work. And now that you've found Japanese rice flour, you've started to use it, you're finding that it makes a pliable bread that tastes like bread, a bread that feels like bread. Now you can compare it to some of the loaves that are on the market now that are using a myriad of different flours and are often bound together with either egg white or xanthan gum or gum arabic. And these, they may look like a normal loaf of bread, but they tend to crackle apart. And the texture is not so lovely if you're the person eating a sandwich or something. It tends to crackle apart, crumble apart. So what's nice about working with Japanese rice flour from this perspective is you can make a cake or a bread or a scone or anything like this, and you're going to have that that ability to tear off a piece without it crumbling into 100 little pieces. See, I can tear this in half and it doesn't fall apart. It's still pliable. It's still malleable. So this is the feature when we talk about crumble free. It's the crumb. Your crumb stays moist and it retains the fat in the water.
I see. Do you mind coming a little bit closer to the camera to show us the bread?
Yeah. Can you guys see me okay here? So see, I wobble it back and forth. It doesn't crumble apart. I can break it. It's not falling off into pieces. Does that make sense? So it stays moist. It has the flavor and the aroma of bread as if you were making it with rye or with wheat, but it's 100% rice. So it's 100% gluten-free. It's very easy to work with. You really, this is one of those things where you're not going to understand it until you start baking with it. The stark difference between baking with Japanese rice flour versus baking with rice flours from other countries or other types of gluten-free flours.
Great, thank you. So even though it is gluten-free, delicious bread can be made with Japanese rice flour easily because of its lump-free and crumble-free characteristics. I see. Well, I would love to try some if I got the chance to. So, all right, now let's take a look at the demonstration video on how to use Japanese rice flour. In this video, you can see Chef Zachary's baking advice and techniques based on his experience with the Japanese rice flour. We have sent out a Japanese rice flour bread sample to a limited amount of attendees of this workshop for a first come, first serve basis. So if you have it, that's good, and it will be a good time to enjoy and taste those Japanese rice flour bread. And if you do not, maybe just sit back and relax and enjoy the video. This video will be about 16 minutes long. Here it comes.
Hi, so we're going to be mixing a rice flour cheese bread today. It's a lovely recipe, gluten-free recipe that's going to be using exquisite Japanese rice flour. One of the things that you'll find in using rice flour for pastry application is that it's going to be very delicate and you'll have to treat it something like a pâte sucrée, something like a sugar dough. So you're going to be mixing it ahead of time and making sure you've got all the ingredients combined, but it's going to have to coalesce and temper inside of the refrigerator. So you may want to make it 4 to 6 hours in advance. I would suggest doing it the day before so you know that it's completely solid and the fat and the starch have homogenized completely.
Then once it's been tempered in the refrigerator, you're going to temper it again at room temperature so that it begins to become a little bit soft and malleable. You're going to mix it once, place in the refrigerator. Once it is completely solid, you're going to bring it out and you can either knead it or you can layer it. And I will show you both techniques. Without further ado, we'll get started on the mix. I start with the rice flour. I combine my salt. And usually when I combine the dry ingredients, the next is the Parmesan. I like to use a whisk for this application. One of the nice things about Japanese rice flour is that consistently, brand over brand, every single type of rice flour that I've tried coming from Japan is going to be completely lump-free. So when you pour it out of the bag, you're never going to have any clumps. It's never going to happen. It doesn't happen. Now we're going to add in the fat, which is butter. And this we're going to cut in using a stiff bowl scraper. So I like to put a little flour on top and then begin to cut flour in. And once I've got my butter broken apart some into, we'll say, fingertip or fingernail size pieces, then I'm going to add my water, and the whole thing will very quickly come together. It's a very easy flour to work with, extremely consistent particle size, and that's due to the milling technique that is used for the Japanese rice flour. It's quite remarkable and very consistent. So at this stage, we're going to add the water. And I'm going to gently, just the same as you would with the pâte sucrée, I'm going to very gently roll the ingredients together. I don't want to slop around the bowl. I want to be nice and gentle. So first I cut it in, and then I will begin to roll it on top of itself. The aroma is very, very nice. One of the key things to making this dough come out very nicely is to make sure your ingredients are really quite homogeneous. You don't want to have any chunks of butter left. You want to make sure that cheese is very integrated into the dry flour before you start adding other ingredients. The mixing process, I would say, is half of the challenge of this. I'm going to roll it out onto the surface. Make sure I have some dusting flour. I like to use a layering technique. It tends to incorporate the ingredients really cleanly. And we'll use the layering technique also when this dough is finished. So you can see that the dough is now all one color. All the ingredients are incorporated. You can look into the inside of the dough and you won't find any butter pieces, you won't find any clumps of cheese, and you definitely won't find any clumps of flour because the flour doesn't clump. So we're all set to put this into refrigeration. Sometimes a little bit of flour on the outside can make it easier to handle. And this I'm going to wrap up and put into refrigeration, and we will have the ability to use this in a few hours. So I'm just going to wrap this up in plastic so that the dough doesn't oxidize overnight. Doesn't have to be too tight, just covering all surfaces. Now I already have some made from yesterday, and I want to show you two different methods for how you can work with this. One is going to be layering, and I suggest doing the layering if you're going to be making cheese sticks or grissini, and you could even use it if you wanted to do, say, a quiche crust. But for the lavash, which is like a cracker, I would suggest actually kneading it by hand a little bit. And I'll show you how to do that. First, we'll start off by layering using a rolling pin. You want a little flour on top, a little flour on the bottom, and you're going to use a crisscross pattern so that you get even compression from top and bottom. So that means I'm going to apply pressure with the rolling pin in one direction, then I change directions and apply pressure like this. I'm going to flip the dough over and do the same thing on this side. At first, the dough will be stiff, much like a pâte sucrée would be, but eventually, as you start to apply pressure, it begins to be something that you can roll out. And it doesn't really matter if you get little ends on the side like this, because as we layer, we'll do it 3 times, it kind of comes out with the wash. I want to make sure that I have a little flour on both sides, and I'm going to take it out into a rectangle so that I can cut out some cheese sticks and some grissini. Now, the difference between the two is in many cases just a matter of opinion, but sometimes grissini can look a little more elegant for, say, a cocktail party or something like that, and cheese sticks might be a good suit for a snack for the kids, or something also that you can put in the pastry case if you run a gluten-free bakery and want to be serving something that is above and beyond the average gluten-free product. So I'm going to take it to about 3 or 4 millimeters, not too thick, but just thick enough that I can handle it. You'll see that the protein in the rice flour is going to be slightly active. So as you squeeze on it, as you pull on it, it pulls back a little bit. And that's a really nice feature with the Japanese rice flour. It's very consistent results every time you work with it. So as I trim the edges, this can be reused. I end up with a pretty clean rectangle. And now from here, I like to save that pile, and that will go into the next round. From here, I can make cheese sticks, which are, say, a 1/2 inch, give or take. I'm going to lay them onto the sheet tray, evenly spaced apart. You can actually fit a lot more on the sheet tray if you're doing this professionally and you want to maximize what you're getting out of the oven. The grissini. Now, sometimes for the grissini, I like them to be just a little bit thinner. Maybe 4 millimeters for the cheese sticks and 3 millimeters for the grissini, something like that. Because we did the layering technique, and because the Japanese rice flour is extremely consistent, you can expect to get a little bit of a rise as it is in the oven. So while it looks flat right now, when this comes out of the oven, it's going to have a rounded top to it. And because of the milling technique, the protein in the rice flour, in the Japanese rice flour, is never damaged. So you want to make sure to keep these pretty straight as you go. I give them a little tiny tug, a little pull as I lay them on the pan. So as I said, this is nice for cocktail parties and other events where you've got lots of people that want to have a little snack but want to look elegant while they're snacking. I'd like to move on to the lavash. I want to say that this dough is really quite an extraordinary dough. The Japanese rice flour pulls in the fat in just such a way that it allows you to layer the dough, which creates a crispiness, a flakiness that I've never seen in any other gluten-free flour. And to boot, I've never seen it in any other type of rice flour. So when I'm working with Japanese rice flour, I know that I've got a wide range of versatility of what I can do with the product, and I also know that I'm going to have a consistency, meaning month after month, year over year, I'm going to get this very same product, lump-free, and very easy to work with, the same particle size for pretty much, you know, the entirety of the flour that's in your hands. So for this one, I don't necessarily have to use the rolling pin until the end when I'm really flattening it. I can just begin to take the dough out with my hand and just roll it back up. And you see it starts to get a little rough like it was when we were mixing. But what this will do is it will sort of tenderize the dough a little bit. It aerates it a little bit in a way that layering doesn't quite do. So that can be nice for a cracker because we're not looking to get a rise so much from the cracker. We're looking to have a nice, even, flat, yet crumbly cracker. I'll take it out with the rolling pin. It'll be very easy to do with the rolling pin at this point because it's pretty soft. Right. Keep adding flour because it will stick to the table a little bit, much as a pâte sucrée would. Then when it's nice and thin, save my scraps for another lavash later. I'm going to take what I have here, and you'll see it peel off very nicely, and it's got enough protein in it that you can hold it like this and it doesn't tear. So this is very nice. Now when I lay it on the sheet pan, one thing that's key is to make a few little holes. We call that docking. If you have an actual docker, that's what I would suggest. If you have a fork, you could use a fork. If you have a pastry cutter or a pizza cutter, you can just make a few incisions. Okay, so this is going to go into an oven, all three of these at 180 degrees or 350 degrees, 180 degrees Celsius or 350 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm going to go ahead and load these into the oven. And again, since I'm baking from a home oven, I want to make sure to rotate in the middle of the bake. And we will be baking until they're golden brown. All right, the lavash is ready. And it appears the grissini is ready. And we're going to give the cheese sticks just a few more minutes. They're a little bigger, a little thicker. They need to bake a little bit longer. But you can see you've got a nice blistering, makes a lovely cracker, and also make a nice quiche crust. And here you've got these very elegant, long, thin, little grissini that are lovely to put into a cocktail glass or something like that. So it looks like our cheese sticks are ready. And you can see how they have come up in volume with a nice rounded layer, and they're very, very light, very airy, and that's through the layering technique. So if you don't want it airy, if you want it a little denser but still crispy, then using the mashing technique with the back of your hand, folding it over and mashing with your hand, that's going to give you a lavash, or if you don't cut it, you can use it for a quiche crust or a tart crust or something like that. But the layering technique is going to help for your grissini and your cheese sticks to give it a nice rounded top to it. And this makes it, of course, more attractive and flakier as you bite it.
Great. Well, even through the screen, I feel like I could smell the deliciousness of the cheese stick. And for those who had samples, hope you liked it, enjoyed it. So today we only got time to introduce one type of the recipe at the moment, but we have attached other recipes, including this one with a flour sample, which is a flour sample. We send it to every participant of this event. So either you have it or it's on the way. So look out for it. And do you have any other suggestions, Chef Zachary?
Oh gosh, well, I mean that recipe is just wonderful. I think that it's that wasn't my recipe, by the way. I didn't create that one. That one was given to me by the purveyor of that particular flour, and we're passing it on to everybody to give it a try. But it's just it was so versatile. As somebody who's done a lot of research with different ways to approach gluten-free. That I honestly felt like that recipe was one of these kind of cover all your needs kind of recipes, and it was also really easy to make. So while it was easy to make, it applied to so many different types of food. So I was able to make savory tart shells with it. I was able to make quiche, actually baking the custard in with that as the crust, and as you saw, the grissini and the lavash and the cheese sticks, it comes as the cheese sticks recipe, and so that's probably the application that it was intended for. But there's just so much you can do with it. The nice thing is about this is that it really has quite a long shelf life. So if you are running a gluten-free bakery, you could put it in some cellophane, and then it's good for days. I've been able to keep it at my house for days. My kids love this dough, so I actually keep some on hand. Since I've been working with Japanese rice flour, I keep that cheese pastry dough on hand in the refrigerator or in the freezer, and then I break it out every now and then. My kids get really excited when they see that there's about to be some cheese sticks in the house. So kind of fun.
Thank you, Chef. Okay, now let's move on to our Q&A session.
Yeah, let's do.
So the first question from our attendees is, what specific purpose can you use Japanese rice flour for?
Okay, so I feel like that's a question I get a lot, and I've gotten it from my staff too. Well, they're watching me do experiments over the last few years. The truth is, you can kind of make anything that you can think of, anything that you could use, like a low gluten wheat flour for, say a pastry flour, anything that you would apply that to, you could really make with the Japanese rice flour. We've already gone over the reasons, the dominant reasons. It arrives, without any lumps in the flour, always, and year over year, month over month, it's always like that, consistent in that way. We've talked about its fat absorption ability, its water retention ability, and its pliability or its crumble-free ability with cake or with bread. So we know that it acts in a certain way, and it acts predictably. But what that means, what that translates to for us, the baker, is that you can make anything that really you can think of: crumpets, scones, bread, of a multitude of different types of bread with egg in it, bread with milk in it, vegan bread. You could make, you can make all different kinds of savory crackers, savory pastries. I think that you could push the envelope a little bit, and you could do things like I was talking before about doing actually a Napoleon with it. You could actually make a puff pastry with Japanese rice flour. Then you can make a pastry cream using maybe one of the finer, one of the talcum-y, super fine Japanese rice flours to make your pastry cream with, or your custard with. Use that as the thickener with some egg yolk. And you put the two together, you'll have a Napoleon, a proper Napoleon, 100% gluten-free. I mean, to people who are really focusing on gluten-free, you now have access to a flour that will give you kind of anything that you need to be able to make to fit the category that you're trying to achieve. So that's really why, you're seeing me on the screen today. I kind of wish we could all do this in person, but I wish that I could convey to you why I'm doing this. It's like I have worked with every kind of flour I could think of, everything I could Google, everything I talked to other gluten-free bakers about. And some flours, I didn't feel like that was a good idea at all in the first place. And other flours, I felt like, well, I want to go down that road and see what happens. And I tried all different kinds of things. But when the Japanese rice flour, and specifically the Japanese rice flour, when I was able to start working with that, it opened a door to where I was now able to bake kind of everything I could think of. Of course, you have to adjust your recipe. And each flour is going to be a little bit different. Each mill is going to have a different breed of flour, a different variety of flour. But once you start working with it, and once you figure out how to make what you want to make, once you've set your recipe, it's just like you press go, and there it is. Your staff can go forth with it because it's not going to change year over year, month over month, same stuff. So, I mean, cake, cookies, any kind of cookie you can think of. Any kind of cookie you can think of. Cake can be a little bit challenging. You got to be delicate with it, but still, it'll retain the gas. It'll stay fluffy. You can do everything from a chinois to a pound cake and anything in between. Breads, any type of bread you can think of. Crackers are so easy. You could, as I said before, you could practice with your layering methods, and you can start working on tart shells and things like that. And I would encourage people to really just experiment and see how the protein in rice flour works, because it's got this ability to, it's got an elasticity to it. So you can actually create products that I almost feel like you would if you weren't focusing on gluten-free, it's as if you were using like a low gluten pastry flour or something like that. So anything that you could apply a low gluten pastry flour to, you can now apply Japanese rice flour to, and you're able to use a gluten-free flour to make the same product. So I hope that answers that question.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. Okay, the second one is, why were you attracted to Japanese rice flour? Why not American rice flour?
Okay, that's a good question. It's a little bit of a delicate issue because, you want to support home and nation and all that stuff. But at the same time, we have to be realistic about what is like the highest quality. As some people say, there's good, better, best. So Japanese rice flour is, we've talked about the milling technique. The milling technique is unique to Japan, and it's specific to rice flour. You can put it up against any other different method that you've got out there, but at the end of the day, you've just got a tremendous amount of potential with the Japanese rice flour because of its level of consistency, because of its level of quality. So it's a tough one to answer. Why choose this versus another? You have to use it. You have to first you have to learn to understand it. You have to understand its water retention, its fat retention, its elasticity. And once you're kind of in that headspace, then you can begin to explore recipes that are going to work really well for it. But once you've done that, you've sort of opened the door to a way of gluten-free baking that otherwise it's just not there. It doesn't compare to other countries that are using different methods of milling and kind of have a myriad of different rices that are coming in and being blended to hit certain specs. You're not getting that experience with Japanese rice flour. You're getting, if I can use this word, you're getting artisan, pure, clean flour.
I see. Well, you talked about the milling methods. Can you go a little bit deeper on the milling method? Like, how are they different from other countries?
Yeah, so the milling method that's used in Japan, as I described before, is specifically the grain goes into a chamber where jets of cooled air, with very high speed cool air, is moving in through small holes and forcing the grains to bounce against each other as they fall, as gravity drives it down towards the earth. They're bouncing into each other, and they can't stop bouncing into each other until they're an identical particle size. So what comes out the other side is this flour that you know what you're getting every single time. If it's coming from one mill, it's always going to be the same. You know, next week, next month, next year, year after that, the exact same flour. And it's coming from the same fields where the rice is being grown. So you can really expect extremely consistent results. Whereas other milling methods, say you've got hammer mills, you know, that's not commonly used for rice, but it has been. Hammer mills, you've got roller mills, you've got grist mills. Believe it or not, people are stone milling rice flour. And that's, you know, you've got your levels of inconsistency that happen in those milling methods. And those milling methods work really well for wheat and for rye. Well, hammer mill less so, but roller mill works well for wheat and rye. Stone grist mill, that works very well for wheat and rye. But for rice flour, you're not getting the same experience. You're really going to get quite a consistent particle size through the Japanese jet mill method, and that is the thing that gives you that predictable absorption rate of fat, the predictable rate of fermentation, and the predictable rate of absorption of water or water-based substances like milk, almond milk, coconut milk, any of that. So the milling method actually has everything to do with the consistency, but the quality goes towards the Japanese farmers. So it's kind of a mix. It's kind of a combination that gives you this product that's, as like I said, once you start using it, it opens a new door for you in the gluten-free world.
Thank you so much. Well, let's move on to the next question.
Sure.
Well, I think we got this question from yesterday as well, but we sent out 3 Japanese rice flour sample and some people got it. So they were wondering, what are the differences between those rice flours? Are they the same? Do they taste the same?
No. So let me try to answer that question as with as much description as possible. So each mill is going to be milling grain that's grown in the region where that mill is. So Japan is, you know, we all know what Japan looks like. It's got different altitudes. It's got different microclimates. So the varieties of rice that are appropriate to one region or that grow best in one region with one type of soil, that's what a mill is going to be milling in that region. And when you change altitudes, you change microclimates, that mill is going to be milling a different variety of flour. All of them are going to taste different. And like when you think of sake, you think of a fermented beverage that it's delicious no matter which one you have. I mean, some are more, appealing than others, but each one of them tastes very different. Now that, of course, has a lot to do with the brewing method, you know, how it is made. But essentially what it boils down to is they're different varieties of rice. So these mills are different mills that are producing different varieties of rice into flour. The thing that unites them, that makes them kind of the same thing, we can say, what's the difference between Japanese rice flour versus other rice flours? It's the milling method. But what makes each of them taste different and taste exquisite, that comes down to the region that it's grown. So the answer to that question, I hope I'm getting this one. I hope I'm answering this person's question, but it's every single one tastes different, but once you have figured out how to use that particular rice flour, at that point, it becomes extremely consistent. So I would suggest trying as many as you can. You can actually contact the millers directly and find out more about each of these flours. But that's going to, you're going to have to take that effort and reach out. I believe they can do that through this seminar, but I'm not really sure about the details on that. But that can be done. And once you've done that, you're going to really start to get to know the differences between each of these mills. The flours are totally different. Each one's totally different, and you're going to have to work with it. And I think you'll enjoy the process because it's kind of, as I said before, it's opening a new door. And once you've figured out how to do it with one flour, certain products work best for one flour, gives you certain flavor varieties. And then you try another flour and you get a totally different experience. But anyway, you're going to have to give it a go. You're going to have to try each different brand. But the answer is yes, they all taste different. And each one is pretty easy to work with.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So this one says, can I make sourdough bread with Japanese rice flour?
Yes. Okay. Yes, you can. You can, but you have to sort of tie into your understanding that the protein that is in rice flour that's in rice is different than the protein that's in wheat. It's really quite different. So you have essentially three different proteins that are that make up what's in rice. They are soluble in water and sodium solution. They're soluble in a alcoholic solution. So you get alcohol through fermentation, and if you add salt to your water, you get a sodium solution. And they're also soluble in an alkali solution. So what that means is that your body will get the most out of it. Your body will be able to absorb the most nutrition, at least the most of the protein, through a low acidic environment, which would be not a sourdough, actually. And usually, if anybody who knows me, they know I'm a huge proponent of sourdough. But when it comes to rice flour, I find that you get the best results in a low acid environment, and you do need to use a little bit of salt in the bread. So when you've done this combination, you're getting the most of all three of those proteins. Once you've hydrated, those proteins work very well to make a myriad of different products, but ultimately it's food, and we want to be able to absorb it in our gut and make energy of it with our body, grow muscles and bones and hair and all that. So the process of doing that, I think one has to cooperate with how this particular grain likes to ferment and what you can get out of it once it's fermented. So in answer to your question, yes, you can do it. You can make sourdough with rice flour, but you may be better off making a less acidic dough and seeing the results that you get from that. I also have found, I just want to say this, that you're better off maintaining a starter at a cold temperature. If you're going to be keeping a sourdough starter, keep it cold. Maybe feed it once a week or once every 3 days or something like that. When you feed it, you pull it out from the refrigerator, leave it out for 6 hours, feed it, leave it out for 6 hours, put it back in the refrigerator for a couple of days. Because if you do a rice flour sourdough day over day, every 12 hours you're feeding it, or every 24 hours you're feeding it, or if you're doing a really wet one, every 8 hours you're feeding it, you might end up with some flavors that are kind of off, not necessarily desirable, and you might end up with an unpredictable dough. So to make sure that if you're maintaining a completely gluten-free sourdough starter and you choose to use Japanese rice flour as your food source for the starter, my suggestion based on my experience is to keep it refrigerated the majority of its life. So I hope that answers that question.
Thank you, Chef. Since our time is limited today, I think that is all we can cover for now, but we will try to answer all of your questions by email, so stay tuned. So if you want to know more detailed information or specific question you have, you can make an appointment or meeting with Japanese rice flour manufacturers directly, as Chef Zachary mentioned earlier, when you fill out the survey after this event. So as Chef Zachary explained the characteristics and advantages, recipes for using Japanese rice flour, I hope you have gained a full understanding and potential of this product in your professional field. I would like to introduce our various manufacturers. And as I said before, you have the opportunities to inquire about the product or information, have online meeting with the Japanese rice flour manufacturers. I will announce the short survey at the end of this event, and you can fill out a form from there. So the first one is Komeko Knusperlast by Kojo Seifun, which is this bag right here. And the second one is the rice flour number 3 hard by Mitake Food Manufacturing. Is this one. And for those who actually got the bread sample, it's used for the slow fermentation loaf. And the next one is the organic rice flour by Organic Cafe Omotesando, which is this one. And it was used for the milk bread. So if you would like to know more about Japanese rice flour, we do have an official website. You can just type in Japanese rice flour JFoodo at the search, maybe Google, and this website will pop up. This is the top page. It'll look like this. And in the website, you can find out about different Japanese rice flour brands, products, as well as recipes, and also real chefs and what they think of about Japanese rice flour. So it seems like our workshop is coming to an end. But before that, I kindly ask you to fill out a short survey about this event. We would love to hear your feedback. And you could do that in 2 ways. You can scan the QR code on the left, which will directly bring you to the survey. Or after leaving this meeting, there will be a continue button on the window, on the browser window, so you can click there and it'll take you to the survey. And please choose either one that is most convenient for you. An option to set a meeting directly with the Japanese rice flour manufacturers will be possible at the end of the survey. The application to contact Japanese rice flour manufacturer will be due at the end of today. So please take the chance and set up the meeting if you would like. And they'll contact you in the near future. So Chef Zachary, thank you very much for sharing your experience and work with the Japanese rice flour today.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. Again, I wish that we had been able to do this in person, although in a certain sense, we're able to reach, a wider girth of people by doing this online. I just think it's a tough time. And, let's try to make the best of it. And we all grow a little bit. We all become a little bit better. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate everybody taking the time out of their day to listen to what I had to say. You wouldn't see me here if I didn't actually really love this stuff. So I don't know if that's convincing at all, but you really won't know till you get your hands on it. And I encourage all of you to give it a try, and whatever you can think of baking, go for it, because you're going to be able to do it.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for taking the time attending the workshop today. Hope everyone stay warm and safe, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.
Bye, everybody.